It's still hot. Please eat before it get cold.
Why would you help someone like me?
Because everyone deserves one warm meal.
Cold rain washed the blood from the cobblestones of South Boston, but it couldn't wash away the neighborhood's darkest secrets. She thought she was feeding a broken, forgotten beggar hiding in the shadows. She had no idea the trembling hands accepting her warm bowls controlled the city's most ruthless underworld empire. Lydia Harper was 23, but her eyes held the exhaustion of a woman twice her age. Drowning in medical debt, left behind by her late mother's battle with aggressive leukemia, Lydia's life was a relentless cycle of survival. She worked double shifts at O'Malley's Diner on Tremont Street, a greasy spoon that smelled eternally of stale coffee and fried onions. Every dollar she earned was immediately swallowed by overdue notices, rent, and the terrifying weekly interest payments she owed to Tommy Razor Gallagher, a mid-level enforcer who operated out of the neighborhood's dingy dive bars. It was mid-November, and the Boston winter had arrived with a vicious, biting wind. The streets were slick with freezing rain, driving most sensible people indoors. But Lydia couldn't afford to be sensible. She had a 2-mile walk back to her cramped apartment. Every night, just past midnight, her route took her down an industrial service road known locally as Bleak Street. It was here, wedged between the rusting loading dock of an abandoned textile warehouse and a towering dumpster, that she first saw him. He was slumped in a rusted, dilapidated wheelchair. A heavy, tattered army surplus coat swallowed his frame, and a thick, woolen beanie was pulled low over his forehead. His face was obscured by grime and the heavy shadows of the alley, but Lydia could see the violent, jagged scar that carved its way from his jawline down to his throat. His right leg was wrapped in filthy bandages, braced awkwardly against the footrest. He looked like a casualty of a forgotten war, shivering violently as the freezing rain lashed against the brick wall behind him. Lydia, clutching a plastic thermos filled with leftover thick oat porridge and brown sugar from the diner's breakfast rush, stopped. She had nothing to give, practically living on leftovers herself. Yet, the sight of the man's trembling hands struck a chord in her battered heart. She knew what it was like to be completely invisible to the world. Slowly, she approached the shadows. "Hey," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the wind. "You're going to freeze out here." The man didn't speak. He slowly lifted his head, and the dim amber glow of a distant street lamp caught his eyes. They were a piercing, terrifying shade of ice blue. For a split second, Lydia felt a cold spike of pure adrenaline hit her chest. There was no defeat in those eyes. There was a sharp, calculating intensity that made her breath catch. But then, the man violently coughed, his broad shoulders shaking, and the illusion of danger vanished. He was just a sick, broken man. "I brought some porridge from the diner," she said softly, unscrewing the lid. A cloud of cinnamon-scented steam plumed into the freezing air. "It's still hot. It'll warm you up." She handed him the plastic container and a plastic spoon. He hesitated. His hands, though scarred and bruised, were strangely large and calloused. He took the bowl. "Thank you," he rasped. His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone, rough like dragging stone over glass. He didn't devour it like a starving animal. He ate methodically, deliberately, his eyes never leaving her face. "I'm Lydia," she offered, wrapping her thin coat tighter around herself. He took another slow bite. "Gabriel," he grunted. That was the beginning of their unspoken ritual. Every night, regardless of the snow, the rain, or the bone-chilling wind, Lydia walked down Bleak Street, and every night Gabriel was there. She brought him porridge, day-old chicken soup, or thick slices of meatloaf. She started bringing him heavy wool blankets she bought from a thrift store, draping them over his ruined legs. Over the next few weeks, the alleyway became Lydia's only sanctuary. Gabriel was a man of few words, but he was an incredible listener. In the dark, shivering cold, Lydia found herself pouring out her soul to the crippled man. She told him about her mother's agonizing final days in Mass General Hospital, under the care of Dr. Harrison, a man whose bills were still haunting her. She talked about her dreams of opening a bakery, and eventually, she told him about Tommy Gallagher. "I owe him $10,000, Lydia confessed one Tuesday night. tears freezing on her cheeks as she watched Gabriel eat his porridge. It was the only way to pay for the experimental treatments for my mom. Now, the interest is so high I can't even cover the principal. He showed up at my apartment building today. He told my landlord, Mr. Henderson, that if I don't pay up by Friday, I'm going to have to work it off at his club downtown. She shuddered, burying her face in her hands. She didn't see the way Gabriel stopped chewing. She didn't see the way his ice blue eyes darkened to a terrifying bottomless black, or the way his grip tightened around the plastic spoon until the handle snapped with a sharp crack. This Tommy, Gabriel's voice was dangerously quiet, rumbling from deep within his chest. Where does he drink? Lydia sniffled, wiping her nose with her sleeve. O'Brien's pub on 4th Street. He basically owns it. Why? Gabriel, please, don't say anything to anyone. He's a monster. He put a guy in a coma last month just for looking at him wrong. Gabriel slowly set the broken spoon down. He reached out, his rough, scarred fingers gently brushing a snowflake from Lydia's cheek. The touch was surprisingly tender, completely at odds with his rugged, ruined exterior. Don't worry, Lydia, Gabriel whispered, the gravel in his voice carrying a strange, heavy weight. Monsters bleed, just like everyone else. Lydia offered him a sad, pitying smile, thinking it was just the empty bravado of a broken man trying to comfort her. She said her goodbyes, leaving him alone in the snow. She had no idea that the moment she turned the corner, Gabriel Rusell reached beneath his heavy coats, pulling out a sleek, encrypted satellite phone. Thursday night at O'Malley's Diner was a living nightmare. Lydia was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door chimed violently. Tommy Razor Gallagher walked in, flanked by 2 massive men wearing leather jackets. Tommy was a vile man with a slicked-back haircut, a cruel smile, and a gold watch that cost more than Lydia would make in a decade. The few customers in the diner immediately dropped their eyes to their plates. Even Mr. O'Malley, the usually boisterous owner, retreated into the kitchen and stayed there. Tommy slid into a booth near the front, tapping his heavy rings against the Formica table. Lydia, sweetheart, bring me a coffee. Black. Lydia's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the pot. She walked over, pouring the coffee, her heart hammering against her ribs. Tommy suddenly reached out, his hands snapping like a viper to wrap around her wrist. His grip was agonizing. Tomorrow's Friday, Lydia, he hissed, his foul breath smelling of stale whiskey and cigarettes. I checked your bank accounts. You ain't got it, so pack a bag. I'm picking you up at 8. You're gonna look real pretty dancing at the Velvet Lounge. Please, Lydia gasped, tears welling in her eyes as she tried to pull away. I just need 1 more week. I'll take a 3rd job. I don't want your pennies, bitch! Tommy sneered, standing up and twisting her arm until she cried out in pain. He shoved her backward. She stumbled, crashing into a table, sending dirty plates shattering across the linoleum floor. 8 o'clock. Be ready, or I'll have my boys burn this pathetic diner to the ground with Old Man O'Malley inside. Tommy and his men strutted out, leaving Lydia sobbing amidst the broken porcelain. That night, the walk to Bleak Street felt like a death march. Lydia was completely broken. She didn't bring porridge. She just needed to see Gabriel. She needed to sit in the quiet dark before her life ended tomorrow. When she arrived at the alley, she collapsed onto the frozen ground next to his wheelchair, burying her face in his heavy coat, and wept uncontrollably. She told him what happened. She showed him the dark, plum-colored bruises already forming on her pale wrist in the shape of Tommy's fingers. Gabriel didn't say a word. The silence radiating from him was absolute, but the air around him felt physically heavy, crackling with an unseen, terrifying electricity. He stared at the bruises on her wrist, his jaw ticked. For a fleeting second, the hunched, crippled man disappeared entirely. In the shadows, Gabriel sat up perfectly straight, his chest broad, his posture radiating an aura of lethal, commanding authority. Go home, Lydia, Gabriel commanded softly. Not a request, an order. Lock your doors. Do not look out the windows tonight. Tomorrow you will be free." "You don't understand," she sobbed. "Nobody can stop Tommy. The police are on his payroll." "I am not the police," Gabriel replied, his blue eyes flashing like cold steel. "Go home." Lydia didn't know why, but she obeyed him. She went home, locked her deadbolts, and curled into a ball on her bed. She didn't sleep. She just waited for the morning, for Tommy's heavy fist against her door. But morning came, and the knocking never happened. 8 o'clock passed. 9 o'clock. At noon, Lydia finally turned on the local news. The anchorwoman looked pale and disturbed. A shocking wave of violence overnight in South Boston. Authorities arrived at O'Brien's pub early this morning to find the establishment entirely gutted by fire. The owner, Thomas Gallagher, along with several known associates, are currently missing. Police discovered significant amounts of blood at the scene, and unnamed sources within the precinct are calling it a highly coordinated, professional hit. Furthermore, evidence files containing illegal loan records were dumped on the steps of the district attorney's office. Lydia stared at the television screen, her blood turning to ice. Tommy was gone. Her debts, the records had been handed to the DA. It was impossible. It was a miracle. She had to tell Gabriel. She threw on her coat, grabbing her largest thermos. She made a massive batch of the thickest, richest porridge, loaded with butter and cinnamon, and practically sprinted the 2 miles to Bleak Street in the middle of the day. As she turned the corner onto the industrial road, her footsteps slowed to a halt. The desolate alleyway was entirely blocked off. 4 sleek, armor-plated black Cadillac Escalades were parked in a defensive perimeter. A dozen men in immaculate dark suits and long trench coats stood silently in the falling snow. They were massive, heavily armed, their eyes scanning the rooftops and streets with cold, professional paranoia. Lydia froze, clutching the thermos to her chest, terrified she had walked into a cartel war. She backed up, intending to run, when she saw him. The rusted wheelchair was empty, pushed aside like garbage against the dumpster. Standing in the center of the men was Gabriel, but it wasn't the Gabriel she knew. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal gray 3-piece suit that probably cost more than Lydia's life insurance policy. A long, luxurious black cashmere overcoat draped over his broad shoulders. He was leaning on a silver-handled cane, yes, but he was standing tall, a towering, imposing figure of absolute power. A silver-haired man in a suit, who looked terrifyingly like a high-ranking mob boss, stepped forward and bowed his head deeply to Gabriel. "The rats have been cleared from the south side, boss," the silver-haired man said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet, snowy street. "Gallagher is swimming in the harbor. The rest of the Rusell family capos have sworn their loyalty. Your throne is secure." Gabriel nodded slowly. "Good. Have the cars readied. We leave for the estate." Lydia's mind shattered. Boss, Rusell, family, throne. She took a step backward, her boot crunching loudly on a piece of icy gravel. Instantly, 12 heavily armed men snapped their heads toward her. Guns were drawn in a synchronized wave of clicking metal. Lydia let out a muffled scream, the thermos slipping from her numb fingers. It hit the pavement, shattering the plastic top, sending warm porridge and steam spilling across the frozen asphalt. "Hold your fire!" Gabriel's voice roared through the alley, carrying the sheer, undeniable force of a king. The men immediately lowered their weapons, stepping aside to create a wide path. Gabriel turned slowly, leaning heavily on his cane. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Lydia, who was trembling, pressing her back against the frozen brick wall, realizing with paralyzing clarity that the homeless man she had been feeding for a month was Gabriel Rusell, the undisputed, ruthlessly violent head of the East Coast's most powerful crime syndicate, who had been missing and presumed dead after a massive mob war. Gabriel stepped forward, ignoring his capos. He walked slowly toward her, his heavy cane clicking rhythmically against the blood-stained snow. Gabriel stepped forward, ignoring his heavily armed capos. He walked slowly toward her, his heavy cane clicking rhythmically against the blood-stained snow. Lydia couldn't breathe. The massive, terrifying men in tailored suits, watched her with a mixture of confusion and intense reverence. To them, she was a nobody, a waitress in a stained coat. But to the Don of the Rusell family, she was the woman who had kept him alive. "Lydia," Gabriel said, his gravelly voice dropping an octave, softening into the familiar tone he had used in the dark. He looked down at the shattered thermos and the spilled porridge smoking on the ice. A flicker of genuine sorrow crossed his harsh features. "You dropped your thermos." "You," Lydia stammered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. "You're Gabriel Rusell," the news said. "They said you were dead. A car bomb in the North End." "A premature obituary," Gabriel replied smoothly. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently wrapping around her unbruised wrist. "Come with me. You are freezing. And the streets are no longer safe. Not for me, and certainly not for you." Before she could protest, Gabriel led her toward the lead escalade. A towering bodyguard hastily opened the door. The interior smelled of rich, custom leather and expensive cologne, a jarring contrast to the stale grease of O'Malley's diner. Gabriel climbed in beside her, resting his cane against the center console. As the convoy of armored SUVs pulled away from Bleak Street, Lydia stared out the tinted windows, watching her miserable, poverty-stricken life vanish into the rearview mirror. They drove for 40 minutes in heavy silence, leaving the grimy streets of South Boston for the sprawling, heavily wooded estates of Weston. The convoy turned down a long, winding driveway flanked by massive, wrought-iron gates and stone gargoyles. They pulled up to a breathtaking, palatial brick mansion that looked like a fortress. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter with tactical rifles, accompanied by massive Dobermans. Lydia was ushered inside by a silent, perfectly dressed staff. She was taken to a master suite the size of her entire apartment building, instructed to shower, and provided with soft, incredibly expensive cashmere loungewear. When she finally emerged, smelling of lavender and cedar, a maid escorted her to a vast, mahogany-paneled library. Gabriel was sitting in a winged leather chair by a roaring fireplace. He had discarded his suit jacket and unbuttoned his collar, exposing the edge of the jagged scar that ran down his neck. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter, offering one to her. "Sit, Lydia," he requested softly. She sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, clutching the glass with both hands. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, the shock finally giving way to a profound sense of betrayal. "I sat with you every night. I cried to you. I thought you were a homeless veteran. I thought you were alone." "I was alone," Gabriel corrected, his ice blue eyes locking onto hers. 2 months ago, my own underboss, Jackie O'Rourke, rigged my Bentley with C4. He bought off half my crew and the police commissioner. The explosion shattered my right leg, cracked 3 ribs, and nearly severed my vocal cords. He took a slow sip of his drink, the firelight dancing in his cold eyes. "I couldn't go to Mass General or Brigham and Women's Hospital. O'Rourke had doctors on his payroll. If I went into an ICU, I would have been smothered with a pillow before midnight. So, I vanished. I went into the deepest, darkest gutter of my own city to heal. I needed time to let my loyalists regroup in secret, and time to find out exactly who had betrayed me." "But why stay in the freezing cold?" Lydia asked, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Why not a safe house?" "Because a safe house leaves a paper trail. The streets make you invisible," Gabriel explained. His gaze softened, and he leaned forward. "But I had a severe infection, Lydia. I was burning with a fever for 2 weeks. I couldn't buy food because I didn't know who would recognize me, and I couldn't trust anyone to bring me anything that wasn't poisoned. Until you." He set his glass down. "You brought me hot porridge. Every single night. You asked for nothing. You owed me nothing. In a world where my own blood betrayed me for money, a girl drowning in debt gave me the only food she had. You kept me alive, Lydia." Gabriel reached over to the mahogany coffee table and slid a thick manila folder toward her. It bore the embossed logo of Kirkland & Ellis, one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in the world. "Open it," he commanded gently. Lydia, with trembling hands, flipped the cover open. Inside were official bank drafts and legal releases from Chase Bank and State Street Corporation, her mother's staggering medical bills, the predatory loans, the eviction notices. Every single document had a heavy red stamp across it. Paid in full. Tommy Gallagher's operations have been dismantled. His debt ledgers are ashes, Gabriel said, his voice devoid of emotion. Your medical debts have been settled through dummy corporations. You owe nothing to anyone. You are completely free. Lydia stared at the papers, her vision blurring. The crushing weight that had suffocated her for 3 years vanished in an instant. She let out a choked sob, covering her mouth as the tears spilled over. But her relief was shattered a moment later. A deafening, concussive boom shook the very foundations of the mansion. The crystal decanter rattled off the table, shattering against the hardwood floor. The library windows, though reinforced with bulletproof glass, spiderwebbed violently as a secondary explosion echoed from the front gates. The mansion's security alarms began shrieking, a high-pitched, terrifying wail that cut through the night. Gabriel's demeanor instantly transformed. The soft, grateful man vanished, replaced by the apex predator of the Boston underworld. He grabbed his cane and a heavy, matte black Glock 19 from the side table in one fluid motion. "O'Rourke," Gabriel snarled, his eyes narrowing to lethal slits. The rat realized, "I'm alive. He's making a desperate play." "Get behind me," Gabriel ordered, his voice echoing over the blaring alarms. He gripped Lydia's arm, pulling her away from the compromised windows. The heavy oak doors of the library burst open, and the silver-haired capo from the alleyway sprinted in, clutching an assault rifle. "Boss!" They breached the south perimeter with a breaching charge on the gate, the capo shouted. "It's a heavy-hit squad. Mercenaries. We need to get you to the panic room in the sub-basement. Now!" "Hold the corridor!" Gabriel commanded, chambering a round into his pistol. Gunfire erupted in the main foyer, a terrifying, deafening cacophony of automatic weapons. Lydia clamped her hands over her ears, screaming in pure terror. She had grown up in a rough neighborhood, but this was a war zone. Gabriel moved with surprising speed, despite his injured leg. He kept Lydia tucked tightly against his side, his large body acting as a human shield as they navigated the dark, labyrinthine hallways of the estate. The air grew thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and smoke. Men in black tactical gear were storming the mansion, their laser sights cutting through the smoke-filled corridors. As they reached the top of the basement stairwell, a mercenary stepped out from a side room, raising a suppressed submachine gun directly at Lydia. Before the man could pull the trigger, Gabriel shoved Lydia violently against the wall and fired 3 times in rapid succession. The mercenary dropped instantly. Gabriel didn't flinch. His face was a mask of cold, calculated violence. This was the monster Tommy Gallagher had feared. This was the true face of the Mafia boss. "Keep moving," Gabriel grunted, his breathing heavy. They scrambled down the stone steps. The panic room was a reinforced steel vault disguised behind a wine cellar wall. Gabriel punched in a code, and the heavy door hissed open. He shoved Lydia inside, but as he turned to follow, another explosion rocked the floorboards above. The ceiling of the wine cellar gave way, showering them in splintered wood and broken glass. Gabriel lost his footing, his bad leg giving out. He collapsed hard against the concrete floor, his gun skittering out of reach. From the dust and debris above, a massive man in a heavy coat dropped down into the cellar. It was Jackie O'Rourke. O'Rourke had a cruel, scarred face and a jagged smile. He raised a heavy shotgun, pointing it directly at Gabriel's chest. "You should have stayed dead in the gutter, Gabe," O'Rourke sneered. "You always were a coward, Jackie," Gabriel spat, bleeding from a cut above his eye, trying to reach for his boot knife, sending a bomb instead of facing me like a man. "A win is a win," O'Rourke laughed, his finger tightening on the trigger. From the shadows of the vault doorway, Lydia didn't think. She acted on pure, terrifying adrenaline. She grabbed a heavy, vintage bottle of Bordeaux wine from a surviving rack and hurled it with every ounce of her strength. The heavy glass bottle smashed directly into the side of O'Rourke's face, shattering upon impact. The mercenary roared in pain, blinded by the alcohol and blood, his shotgun discharging wildly into the ceiling. That 1 second of distraction was all Gabriel needed. He lunged forward, driving his heavy, silver-handled cane upward. The weighted metal grip caught O'Rourke squarely under the jaw with a sickening crunch. The traitor collapsed backward, unconscious, before he hit the ground. Gabriel stood over him, panting heavily. He turned, his icy blue eyes finding Lydia, who was trembling violently against the steel doorframe, her hands covered in wine that looked terribly like blood. Within minutes, Gabriel's men flooded the basement. O'Rourke was dragged away by his collar, destined for a dark, unforgiving fate. The mansion was secured, the attack had failed. An hour later, the estate was quiet, save for the distant wail of approaching, well-paid police sirens who would clean up the mess and look the other way. Lydia sat in the mansion's sterile, state-of-the-art medical bay. She held a cotton swab soaked in iodine, gently dabbing the cut above Gabriel's eye. It was a mirror image of their nights in the alley. Him, broken and bleeding, her, tending to him. But the world around them had fundamentally changed. "You saved my life again, Lydia," Gabriel murmured, wincing slightly as the iodine stung. "I guess we're even," she whispered, her hands shaking slightly. Gabriel reached up, wrapping his large, warm hand over hers, stopping her movements. He looked deeply into her eyes, stripping away the armor of the ruthless Mafia boss. "I told you that your debts are paid. I have a car waiting outside. It will take you to an airfield. I've set up an offshore account in your name with $5 million. You can go anywhere in the world. Start fresh. Open your bakery in Paris, Rome, anywhere you want. You never have to see this darkness again." Lydia pulled her hand back slowly. She looked at the blood on his shirt, the scars on his face, the absolute, terrifying power that radiated from him. She thought of O'Malley's diner. She thought of being invisible, helpless, and preyed upon by men like Tommy Gallagher. Then she looked at Gabriel, the monster who had leveled a city block just because someone put a bruise on her wrist. A man of violence, yes, but a man of unwavering, terrifying loyalty. "And what if I don't want to go to Paris?" Lydia asked softly, her voice steadying. Gabriel's breath hitched, a rare show of vulnerability. "Lydia, this world, my world is soaked in blood. I have enemies everywhere. If you stay, you wear a target on your back for the rest of your life." "I was already a target, Gabriel," she replied, a newfound strength stealing her spine. "Out there, in the normal world, I was prey. I was starving. I was nothing. When I was with you in that alley, that was the only time I ever felt safe." Gabriel stared at her, the harsh lines of his face softening into something profoundly reverent. He slowly reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a set of keys attached to a silver keychain. "I didn't buy a ticket to Paris," Gabriel confessed, his voice a low rumble. "I bought the corner commercial lot on Newbury Street. Across from the public garden, it has commercial ovens, display cases, everything you need for a bakery. It's yours." Lydia took the keys, the cold metal pressing into her palm. Tears welled in her eyes, not of fear, but of an overwhelming, complex realization. She was stepping out of the frying pan and willingly walking into the fire, but this fire didn't burn her. It kept her warm. "Will you come visit the bakery?" she asked, a small, genuine smile finally breaking across her face. Gabriel Rusell, the most feared man on the eastern seaboard, smiled back. "Only if you serve porridge." If this story of dark romance and deadly loyalty kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another thrilling tale. Share this video with your friends and tell us in the comments, would you have stayed with Gabriel or taken the money and run? Let us know.